Hey there, in this video, I am going to walk you through how you can make one hexagon block that you can turn into a pillow or a trivet or a little gift for someone to put on their table. So here is the one I will be demoing, and this is just kind of a generic tutorial. So you can use this tutorial with any of the triangles, any of the equilateral triangles found in the Make Modern Triangles Club hub, especially, and I really had the triangle expansion pack in mind. So you can use this tutorial with any of the triangle expansion pack patterns. So first up, you will want to lay out your triangles into your hexagon shape and do any fancy placement if you need to. So since I've got some fussy cut creatures, ornaments on my triangles, I need to make sure I don't have my two angels right next to each other, right? So lay everything out how you want. All right, now your next step is we are going to sew these into rows, so half hexagon. So I'm going to sew these three triangles together, and then I'm going to sew these three triangles together. So for now, I am going to put these three aside and just focus on these three. All right, so put your two triangles right sides together, and then we're going to line up all the seams we want to line up. So there are these two seams here that need to line up. So I'm just going to line these up here, and then I'm going to add in, I'm going to pin, since I want these to be nice and sharp, and then I'm going to add a pin at the start and at the end, line up these corners. And then I'm going to add another pin here just because I've got quite a bit of distance between these two pins. All right, so now I've got these two triangles pinned together. They are ready to go into the sewing machine. All right, so you'll notice I've got my scant 1/4 inch foot on my machine. So that's the foot I'm using. So as I'm coming up close to this point, I'm just slowing down to make sure I actually hit that point and everything goes smoothly. All right, then I can take my pins out, make sure my iron is heating up. And then I want to open this up and make sure I'm happy with how these seams came together. I am. That looks fabulous. So I'm going to take this over to my pressing station and I am going to press my seams. Okay, so when it comes to pressing your seams for these hexagon blocks, you can do one of two things. You can, one, press your seams open and don't worry about it, or you can press your seams in all one direction. So I'm going to press my seams to the side. So I'm going to press my seams all to this way, to the right. Set the seam, and now I'm finger pressing. And then I'm going to come through and chase my fingers down the seam here. So as you are pressing the seam here, these are bias seams. Probably. These definitely are. And you're probably working with bias seams. So as you are pressing, make sure you're lifting your iron up and down and not applying any pressure back and forth. And if you like to, you can use some starch. I use flatter just because it smells good. I hardly ever put I never put water in my iron. And so it's just a kind of nice way to get some steam and a nice flat seam here. And now my next step is to sew this triangle onto these two triangles. And if I were to do it over again, I would probably start with these two triangles and not these two triangles. So I am wanting to put the unit through my machine like this. That's why I rotated everything. And now we are going to line up these seams and pin them. And hopefully, if I was a good pattern designer, hopefully your seams are going to be nesting nicely. Typically, I design our foundations so that our seams nest. I wanted to zoom in so you can see how I'm lining these up. So I am lining up the tip of my triangle with this dog ear right here. If you have a blunted triangle, then you're going to line up that blunted tip triangle with the edge of your unit. So line up those, and then this side's really easy. You're just going to line up the corners of your triangle here. Bruce Wayne, be quiet. I'm going to add another pin right here just because there's quite a bit of room between these two pins. Okay, this one is ready to go through my machine. All right, let's take out the pins and see how everything matched up. Yeah, matches up nicely. All right, so I'm wanting to press all my seams to the right. So I'm going to flip this over so it's easier for me to press. So press to set the seam. And then flip it over, finger press, and then press. If I iron it and I apply pressure, I can see that the seam here would kind of curve. Okay, so at this point, I have one of my half hexagons sewn. My next step is to repeat the process and sew the other side of my hexagon. So I am going to repeat the process and I will meet you back here. Okay, at this point, I have my 2 half hexagons pieced. Now here is where, if you are making a whole quilt full of these hexagon blocks, I want you to stop here and move on to your next triangle, right? So stop here if you're making a whole quilt. But if you want to make just one hexagon block and turn it into like a trinket like this, you're just making this one thing, then you can proceed, okay? So if you're making a full quilt, stop and move on. That way, if you were to make these into hexagons and make all hexagons, you're going to end up with a bunch of Y seams. So if you're making a whole quilt, stop. I've said that 3 times. I really mean it. Okay, so let's move on and let's sew our hexagon together. So before we do, I just wanted to show you the back side of these. So when you pieced your half hexagon, I told you to make sure your seams are going in all one direction if you want to press them to the side. So I pressed my seams this direction. So this half hexagon has those seams going in this direction, and this half hexagon has the seams going in this direction. So what that does for me is once I put them together, then the seams are going to nest really nicely. So the bottom is going this direction still, and now the top is going in the opposite direction. So that's going to give us some really nice nested seams. The second thing I want to talk to you about is this seam right here. So with this block number 60 or outshine star, we don't have that many seams coming together right here. So this seam isn't going to be that bulky, but there are other patterns in the expansion pack where you might have some bulk as these seams come together. So I'm going to show you what you could do to reduce the bulk in these seams, but I just want to be super clear. For this block, it's not necessary. Okay, so I want to zoom in nice and tight to show you what I'm doing. So if you've ever made any garments before, you might be familiar with the term grading your seams. So we are going to grade these seams a little bit. And so what I'm going to do is I am going to release the seam allowance here. And I want to do this in the seam allowance so I'm not ripping out any of the seams that actually hold the block together. Okay, and then I'm going to just cut the seam allowances so they're different lengths. So really the biggest problem that you'll have with your bulky seams is when all the fabric is there and it's all ending at the same spot. So if it ends in different spots, aka if you have seam allowances that are different lengths, you're going to have less bulk at your seams. So I'm just going to trim this one. This is a really simple example because there's not that many seam allowances here. But if you can see, I've cut this seam allowance so that it is a different size than the rest of the seam allowances. And so that is going to start to reduce that bulk. And so you can do that for all of your seams where you've got some extra bulk that you want to get rid of. I did it with that. So I've got one seam here, one seam allowance is the shortest. And then I cut a second one just to make it a little shorter. And then I've got a third one. And so really the take-home message is whenever you're grading your seam allowances, you just want to make it so that your seam allowances are different sizes. That way you won't have all that fabric ending at that point, and it'll really reduce that bulk. Now, if you needed to debulk the seam or any other seams, go ahead and do that. And then once you have graded those seams, we can sew this hexagon together. So let's put these right sides together. We're going to nest our seam, but we want to line up the center here. Now, for me, my fabric is all the same color. So if I don't match up this point exactly, then it's no big deal. We won't be able to tell, right? So let me zoom in nice and tight so you can see how I do it. So hopefully you can see where this point is on this triangle, right where my thumbnail is right there. And then I am wanting to match that point up with this other point over here. So after years of practice, this is really easy for me to just eyeball. So I just kind of walk these together like this, and that's really easy for me to do. Again, I've had lots and lots of practice with this. So one thing, if you're new to this, I want to share one of my favorite tips I used when I was just starting out was the pin trick. So I used a pin and I would insert the pin just where that point is. So I've got the pin and see how it's coming out right where that point is? And then you can insert the pin in your second point here. And then bring those fabrics together. So now those points should be lined up exactly. So then you can take another pin and pin your fabrics together and then take out that pin, that first pin you used. You can add it again if you like. Okay, so that's our main point matched. And then we also want to line up these so you can repeat with the same pin trick, or if you've got some more experience, you can line those up. And hopefully for whichever block you're working on, you've got some nice seam nesting happening for you. I know I do. That's my favorite part. So pin those and then pin these edges down here at the end. And I need to add another pin just because it's a long way between those pins. Adding a pin here, and then I'm going to pin the start. So I'm lining up these corners here. All right, so this is ready to go in my sewing machine. All right, before we iron, let's open up our seam and make sure we're happy with the points and all the matching. That looks pretty good. That looks pretty good. That looks pretty good. We're good. All right. So your last step is to press your seam. So like before, you're going to press to set. And then at this point, it is up to you whether you want to press your seam open or to the side. I think for me, I'm going to press my seams open. Since I'm just making one, I was going to say I could just make it easy and just press my seams open, but sometimes the seams are easier to press this side. And sometimes for these triangles, when you sew them together, you just have to let the triangle tell you what it wants. Because sometimes those seams are quite bulky and they're just easier if you just do what they want, right? So they're bossy. I think there's a little excess fabric in my center here. For me, it's a little bit trickier to press the center part here. Finger press and then press. And as you're pressing, make sure you are lifting your iron up and setting it back down so as not to warp any of those biased edges. You can see there's just a little bit of extra fabric in the center here. That's why I'm having a hard time pressing. So I'm having to fudge it a little bit. That is okay. It'll quilt out. So see, this seam is just kind of going to the side. So I'm just going to press them to the side. So I'm repressing. So everything's going to the side. Okay, then you're going to flip it over and press it from the pretty side, kind of making sure all the seams are how I want them so I don't create a mess for myself. So you can really see I've got some extra fabric here. I'm hiding it in the seam. Okay, so sometimes I will iron this. I know I say not to do this, but I iron the seam just to kind of get it that point. And so you can see I've got this little extra bubble of fabric right here. I'm thinking I can artfully quilt that out. I'm showing you some things that I feel like they say not to do, but sometimes like I feel like I have to do it to get the point and make the block come out pretty. Full disclosure. Okay, how cute is this? This is so adorable. Cute. So now I have a nice Christmas trivet I can use. So now I can quilt this and put a super cute binding on it and put it on a table for Christmas. Yay! All right, so if you make a trinket using one of the triangle patterns from the expansion pack, let us know, take a picture of it and share it with us in the Triangle Chatter community. We definitely want to ooh and ah over your wee little creation because it's adorable. And I mean, come on, it's adorable. So don't be shy, share that with us in the community. Bye for now.